right? First was the age of the apostles and martyrs, up to 313. Then the second age was the church under the protection of Rome, which is chiefly the Church of the Fathers, the councils from 300 to 600, which is more or less the age, the date of St. Gregory the Great. The third age of the church was the focusing primarily on the West, the conversion of the North and of the West. And that's the age in which the monks are important figures, from the year 600 to the end of the millennium. Then in this medieval synthesis, what I didn't mention was the loss of the Greek church. That is formalized or finalized by the year 1054, the rupture of the Latin West from the Greek church, what we now call the Greek Orthodox Church, which, remember, Pope John Paul would refer to as the loss of one of the lungs. The church really has two lungs, the Greek and the Latin. And with the loss of the Orthodox, the Greek church by the middle of the 11th century, that loss was made permanent. That medieval synthesis is the age of the creation of the universities. First, the University of Paris in 1200, the University of Oxford a few years later, Cambridge, Salamanca, Coimbra in Portugal. All these are great universities. Cologne in Germany. All these universities occur in the beginning of the 13th century. They are given a charter by the Pope, by the Church, and by the king of the local country, and they will be the occasion for the development of the teaching mendicant orders, Dominicans, Franciscans, of the guilds of teachers and students at the universities in Paris and in Oxford and Salamanca. So that gives rise to the great theological systems of the 13th and 14th century. Thomas Aquinas, St. Bonaventure, Blessed Duns Scotus in England. And this is also the period in which feudalism is the dominant social political form. I mean, feudalism, a lot of things that we don't realize that they come out of feudal. For example, this posture, kneeling and with hands like this, which becomes a typical sort of sign of sort of Orthodox piety. That's a gesture of the knight or the prospective knight kneeling before his lord, as vassal before his lord, to receive his kind of unction as a knight. This ceremony of fealty or of promising fidelity. A lot of that these feudal relationships have a kind of a impact on Christian habits and details of piety. Moving on from there to the fifth age of the church, which is age of decline and reformation, 1300 to 1600. At the end of the 13th century, around 1280, we have that first of all, you had the Avignon papacy. This was a kind of a scandal, a symptom of decline. The popes no longer being residing in Rome, but in part of the papal territory, which is in southern France, but also within the area of France. It was like being held hostage to France. And that Avignon papacy was followed by the Great Schism, which lasted for 35 or 40 years, in which there was two popes claiming the papacy and having the allegiance of different countries, France and Spain being allied to the Avignon Pope, and England and Germany and Italy to the Rome Pope. That Avignon, that schism lasted for 35 years or so. And then in the early years of the 15th century was reconciled. The Council of Constance in Switzerland in 1415. But that council also created another problem, which was the idea that a council would be superior to the Pope, which is called conciliarism. And that the danger that the papacy, which is sort of the cornerstone of unity, the unity of the church depends so much on the papacy, and that would be lost if it would be subject to kind of a democratic conciliar oversight. So that brings us up to the Reformations at the beginning of the 16th century. The Reformation in Germany begins in Wittenberg with Luther, professor of scripture in the University of Wittenberg, who has his own problems or struggles with virtue, with ascetical struggle, and he sort of is anxious about salvation, and he sort of comes to this conclusion that it's just his faith in God and a justifying God. This is where salvation is. Justification by faith alone, not by good works. The Catholic system, which emphasizes good works, whether it be pilgrimages or vows or religious life, that's sort of a creation of human pride. And it's justification by faith alone. This is the central cornerstone, the principle of the Lutheran revolt. Now, this begins in 1517. It is followed fairly closely by the Anglican revolt, which comes from a different inspiration altogether. Henry VIII, the main agent of the Anglican revolt, doesn't share any of Luther's theological issues. As a matter of fact, he is in total opposition to Luther. He has written a little book attacking on the sacraments, attacking Luther, for which he has been made the defender of the faith by the Pope. He has other problems, Henry does. And his problem is, the name of his problem is Anne Boleyn. He's been married for many years to Catherine of Aragon, who's the daughter of Isabel and Fernando of Spain, the Catholic monarchs of Spain, and whose nephew, Catherine's nephew, is the emperor, Charles V. And this sets the stage for a major political and religious division. So Henry, to justify his repudiation of his wife Catherine, rejects the church's, the Rome's jurisdiction over his marriage question. He breaks with Rome, and it will be the English episcopate, the English hierarchy, which will settle his marriage question. And of course, we know what they're going to say, how they're going to decide. So that's the motivation for the Anglican break with Rome. There's always been a little bit of a bias in England against any pretension of Rome to legislate over the church in England. So, and there's been acts of parliament prior to Henry that would invalidate any pretension of foreign power, foreign government, such as the Pope in Rome, legislating for affairs in England. So that's you have the English situation, and then 10 years or so later in Switzerland, you have the John Calvin, who's a Frenchman, but who has been exiled from France because of his religious views, who has settled in Geneva and set himself up as a kind of a dictator in Geneva, establishes the Calvinist version of Lutheran theology, more extreme than the Lutheran theology. I mean, Luther would say that, man is corrupt, therefore the only thing that saves him is act of faith in God. Calvin would say, man, he's not just corrupt, some men would be predestined to perdition, and others, the Calvinists, would be predestined to salvation and glory. So it's a much more extreme version of the Lutheran theology. It spawns movements, Protestant movements, for example, in Scotland with Knox, the Presbyterian, it's an offshoot of the Calvinists, and the Puritans that eventually settle in Massachusetts. They are also offshoots of the Calvinist version of Protestant theology. So that's the situation in the 16th century, where the response of the church, we call it the Catholic Reformation. Sometimes it's referred to as the Counter-Reformation, and it is highlighted by the Council of Trent, which clarifies the doctrinal issues that have been raised, issues concerning grace, salvation, scripture, tradition, issues that have been raised by the Protestant reformers, and also settle or establishes systems for training of clergy, seminary systems. It publishes a catechism. The Catechism of the Council of Trent clarifies Catholic teaching and Catholic discipline. So that brings us down to the end of the 16th century. The 17th century is usually called the French century. It's just dominated by, it's the Le Grand Siècle. It's dominated by France, and in theology or in the church affairs, there's the Jansenism becomes kind of the major controversy in France during the 17th century up until the beginning of the 18th century. This is the time of the Ancien Regime, what we call it. What was society like before the revolution? And revolution begins with the summoning of the third estate. In France, there are three. The first is the clergy, the second is nobility, and then the third estate is the commons. And the third estate is summoned in 1789, begins with a religious procession, and it ends with revolution, and with the beheading of King Louis XVI. And Danton and the Robespierre, the terror of 1793, and the revolution, as I said, I think I mentioned earlier, has kind of aftershocks, which throughout the 19th century, subsequent years of revolution, 1830, 1848, and you might say that the Italian situation and the loss of the papal states, which has been kind of the life support of the papacy, providing independence for the papacy almost from the age of Constantine in the 4th century, that takes place and is brought to a conclusion in 1870. 1870, which is also the year of the First Vatican Council, definition of papal infallibility, and in a way, it's kind of the triumph of Pope Pius IX, who ruled for more years than any other pope since St. Peter, 32 years, from 1846 to 1878, the Pius IX, who was at the beginning hailed, he's the most popular man on earth. And then, as he necessarily has to take some conservative positions in the course of the 30 years of his papacy, he becomes less and less the darling of the media and of the popular culture. So he is succeeded by Leo XIII, who was Pope for, 25 years, also for quite a long time. He's kind of an old man when he's elected Pope, and he goes on for 25 years and is an extraordinary teacher. I mean, there's I don't know how many encyclical letters of Pope Leo XIII and on all kinds of subjects, including all the social issues, beginning with the great encyclical Rerum Novarum on the sort of the whole, what do we do? What is the church's response to the industrial age and to capitalism and to the problems of labor and the proletariat? That brings us up into the Pius X, the end of the just the beginning of the 20th century. His papacy goes down until the beginning, the outbreak of World War I in 1914, and I was supposed to end 10 minutes from now, but I think I might end 10 minutes early. Yeah, why do we, why do historians kind of look at 1914, the World War I, as the end of an age? I guess you might say it's sort of like putting the pin in the balloon, bursting the bubble. I mean, all of those dreams of progress, that euphoria has been exploded with the mass kind of incineration of which World War I. It was in a way it was more dispiriting, even you might say, than World War II. It was this crazy war. What was the point of World War I? I mean, World War II you can understand. At least I can, But here you have these nations. They're all cousins of one another. These kings and dukes that are now on the battlefield facing one another. And what is it about? What's the point? I mean, I'm sure there's all kinds of reasons, but it just seems like such a crazy thing. And then I don't think none of them in that Victorian age, none of them realized that such a crazy thing could happen. So I don't know. I mean, I just it's the pen that bursts the kind of the hopes and the illusions of the 19th century. Yes.
When did the Catholic monarchs stop having like veto power over who gets to be elected?
Good question. The last time they tried to exercise that power was at the election of Pius X. There was supposedly the Austrian Holy Roman Emperor had that veto power and attempted to exercise it. And after that, there was church legislation forbidding anything of that sort to take place. Somebody else had a question. Well, where do we go after I think the 20th century? I mean, that's more familiar territory for most of us. And because what you have are it's kind of the revolutions that take place in Spain in 1936. Well, Mexico earlier. These are, times areas of religious persecution, which are very, very significant. But you have also the enormous growth of the church especially in the Southern Hemisphere, in Central Eastern Europe in the 20th century, mid 20th century, late 20th century. And the run up to the Second Vatican Council begins in 1962. I don't know, most people would say that the period between the Second World War and the Second Vatican Council, it's from 45 to 62, was a time of impressive growth and strength in the church. This is during the pontificate of Pius XII. John the 23rd became Pope 1958, I think, right? And then the Vatican Council was he announced the Vatican Council 3 weeks after he was elected Pope. And that Vatican Council begins in 1962. And that's kind of, the need to perhaps get away from the Tridentine kind of defensive stance or positioning of the church, the kind of aggiornamento, opening up to the culture of the world of the 20th century. I mean, these were kind of seem the motivations of that the Pope John brought to the fore in the summoning the Second Vatican Council. And the rest of it is so close to us. It's almost it's difficult to talk about with any degree of detachment. Because for us, the important things are happening are the creation of the work. And this is the extraordinary kind of discovery of holiness in ordinary life. After centuries of just holiness being identified with the religious profession, withdrawal from the world and from worldly occupations. And of course, that spirit finds its confirmation in the decrees of the Second Vatican Council of both the Lumen Gentium and the Gaudium et Spes, the Church in the Modern World. And then, as oftentimes happens with councils, there's kind of a period after post-conciliar period, which is kind of fraught with difficulty and with adjustment, and kind of we experienced that for 20 years, and I think especially with the pontificate of Pope John Paul and Pope Benedict, I mean, that was we survived well, and I think kind of a spirit of optimism is much easier today, I think, than it might have been in the 1970s, when it looked like things were falling apart. Is there anything else that it's not, it's I don't know, I don't know how easy it is to deal with the 2,000 years of church history in 2 hours, but excuse me,
With Martin Luther, when he did faith alone for his faith.
faith, justification by faith alone.
And was it in Trent that we came with faith and works, or was that always?
Always was the church's teaching. Anybody else?
I just want to ask about
I'm sorry, I missed what you were asking.
that you were mentioning that it's not clear from the Bible. The Bible doesn't say that Saint Peter was in Rome.
That's true. He just, what the Bible says, in Acts of the Apostles, is that when he was released from prison, he went elsewhere. He went to another place.
But in his letter,
No, that's a good point. The first letter of Peter says is written from Babylon. That's
Yeah.
right, which was code language for Rome. Yeah, it's that's a very good point. It's not ordinarily used as sort of final proof that of Peter's being in Rome, because the question of authorship is not all that clear, and but it's no, but it is a good point. He's writing from Babylon. Anybody else have something?
That could be New York.
Could be Long Island.
Long Island.
Queens. All right. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Ora pro nobis.